Have it. There doesn't appear to be any need for the front benches to swap over. So we now come to the backbench debate on the impact of import standards on the agricultural sector. I call Sam Carling, who will speak for up to 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move that this House has considered the impact of import standards on the agricultural sector. I'm delighted to have secured today's debate. I'm very grateful to all of the colleagues who signed my application and indeed to the Backbench Business Committee for granting time. And I'm happy to take interventions on my speech this afternoon even. This debate is about the imbalance between our high domestic farming standards, which prioritise animal welfare and the environment, rightly so, and our imports, which often fall short. The government's animal welfare strategy, published just before Christmas, shows our ambition to protect animals, all animals, from needless cruelty and suffering. It's the biggest and most ambitious animal welfare programme in a generation. It includes measures to phase out the use of cages in farming, move away from using carbon dioxide to gas pigs, and introduce standards for the humane killing of fish. That is real progress and reflects overwhelming public support for safeguarding animal welfare. But when we improve domestic animal welfare standards, we have to be careful that we aren't just exporting cruelty overseas. British and Northern Irish farmers want to see animals treated well and have good lives. But as things stand, UK farmers are undermined by low welfare imports. Many countries which we import animal products from don't share our standards, and so those products are cheaper to produce and sell. It means our farmers find themselves in an impossible situation, often unable to compete. Sow stalls, for example, are banned in the UK, but 95% of pork imports come from countries where they remain legal. British shoppers buying bacon have no way of knowing whether the pig that produced it spent its pregnancy in a cage so narrow it couldn't turn around. It's the same for hens. Battery cages are already banned here, and it's brilliant that we are committed to phasing out cages altogether. The government should be congratulated on that. But long term, as a next step, we need to think about imports too. The animal welfare strategy states that we will protect our sensitive sectors and uphold animal welfare standards where we consider overseas produce has an unfair advantage. So the government recognises the issue. Now's the time to put it into practice. Brexit has resulted in a massive increase in non-EU imports over the last few years. Whilst most EU imports have similar standards to the UK, this often isn't the case in non-EU countries. 95% of countries with access to our markets have lower welfare standards than we do. In just 4 years, from 2020 through to 2024, non-EU beef imports increased by 31%. Poultry went up by 60%. For pork, it was 81%, and for eggs, it was a staggering 228%. New trade deals for the UK are welcome, but we need them to uphold our high standards both on animal welfare and pesticides on crops. The price of a good deal cannot be access to the UK food market on more favourable terms than our domestic farmers. I will give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Madam Deputy, first of all, can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for North West Cambridgeshire bringing this forward? He's absolutely right to underline these issues. But does the Honourable Member not agree that the recent, and this is a most recent one, the EU-Mercosur deal opens the EU market to increased imports of agricultural products such as beef, poultry, sugar and ethanol under tariff rate quotas, which may well sacrifice the quality for cash, and this will have an unwanted knock-on effect to our own farmers, which the Honourable Gentleman is very clearly trying to save and look after, who are already under immense pressure, and that the UK government must, I believe, make representations to the EU regarding food safety in this very deal. Thank you.
When he makes his point well, and I'm going to touch on EU regulations later on in my speech. On this so far, our Labour government has a stellar record. In negotiations with India, we refused to lower protection on goods like pork, chicken and eggs. In talks with Korea, we've secured new commitments on animal welfare, stronger than anything they have ever signed up to in any previous trade agreement. The next step is to equalise all our import standards, rather than just new agreements. And we can't go back to full alignment with the EU either. The EU still allows sow stalls, foie gras and fur farming, all of which fall short of our standards. Switzerland successfully negotiated an animal welfare carve-out in its SPS agreement with the EU. I would be grateful if the Minister could confirm whether the government is seeking similar exemptions for animal welfare in the UK-EU negotiations. This would ensure we retain the ability to restrict imports that don't meet British welfare standards. Let me now address any arguments about the impact on food prices these changes could have. Over the past few years, of course, food inflation has hit households across the country, and we all want prices to be more affordable. But I think we can all agree that this shouldn't come at the expense of high standards. In the long run, undercutting our farmers is going to make our food security worse, leaving us more dependent on less reliable markets overseas. As this government has repeatedly said, food security is national security. That means defending our farmers from a flood of low-quality imports.
Will the honourable gentleman give way?
I will give way.
The honourable gentleman mentions food imports and illegal imports. Next month will be the 25th anniversary of the devastating foot and mouth outbreak, and nowhere knows better than my Carlisle and North Cumbria constituency just what happens when foot and mouth takes hold. Does my honourable friend agree with me that illegal meat imports heighten the risk of animal diseases such as foot and mouth, and does he agree that we do need a coordinated strategy that involves government, local authorities and local port authorities to ensure that we're countering those biosecurity risks?
Highlighting the biosecurity aspect of this, my farmers too have been significantly impacted by foot and mouth disease in the past, and I know how important an issue that is, and she put her point on the record. I was talking about the potential arguments around food prices. Research from Animal Policy International shows that were we to act on this issue, the cost to consumers would actually be very small. Banning battery cage egg imports, for example, would cost just 2 to 4 pence per person per year. And since all major supermarkets have already committed to phasing out caged eggs, most consumers would feel zero impact, with battery cage imports going to independent retailers and food service as it stands. The boost to domestic farmers, by contrast, would be huge. UK egg farmers could gain up to £15 million annually if battery cage imports were banned, alongside price stabilisation by removing imports that undercut UK eggs by up to 20 pence per dozen. That doesn't cost the Exchequer, it would be quite a significant benefit to the Exchequer. I will give way.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable member for giving way. I was at Noble Foods just last week as part of the NFU Fellowship Programme, and they were explaining actually not just about the lower standard of welfare. Actually, one of the things that we need to make sure, particularly with eggs, is that they're safe. You're too young to remember, but I remember the salmonella outbreak when I was a teenager, and I think one of the things we have to be clear is about food safety and making sure food safety is as important on our imported goods as our homegrown produce.
I couldn't agree more with my honourable friend. I remember doing that scheme myself last year. I thought it was incredibly valuable. I encourage other colleagues in the room to do it in the future. The NFU are doing a brilliant job with it. Polls show that consumers don't want these low welfare imports either. 9 in 10 people support banning them. That's unsurprising. We are a nation of animal lovers after all, but that level of cross-societal support on an issue is really rare and should be celebrated. 81% of my constituency, North West Cambridgeshire, is made up of agricultural land. It means I spend a lot of time talking to farmers about what they need to thrive, and this issue comes up all the time. And members don't have to take my word on that. They can take the words of Lloyd and Matt, 2 farmers I know from Lod's End Farm at Ramsay in my constituency. Here's what they have to say. We grow high-quality produce to high standards, sometimes for little and often no profit. To see imported produce coming into our country that doesn't meet the same standards that we have to achieve seems wrong. We want a level playing field and to feel that we are valued. So much effort, time, passion and pride goes into everything we grow on the farm. We not only grow quality produce, but also do this while improving habitats for wildlife and reducing our environmental impact. Farmers do so much more than just produce the food we eat. We are an integral part of the communities we are proud to call home. We need to back British farming. And who could disagree with Lloyd and Matt on that? It's certainly not easy to be a farmer. Long, difficult work is set against razor-thin profit margins, unpredictable weather variability made worse by climate change, and distinct unfairness in the supply chain as it stands. So what's the ask here? If we're doing so well as a government on new trade deals, what am I advocating to be changed? Well, it's about legislative change to tackle the flaws in the previous trade deals already damaging farmers like Lloyd and Matt. I'm glad that the government is backing farmers, allocating a record £11.8 billion to sustainable farming and food production over the course of this Parliament. But tackling the unfairness of low welfare imports is something that would make a real difference to farmers in my constituency and across the country. Indeed, just on Tuesday, the EFRA Select Committee took evidence on how important a fair approach on imports is to farm profitability. And it's not just a case of welfare standards, it's environmental too. Crops that have been treated with damaging pesticides are being sold here in the UK, despite those pesticides being banned here. That's not good news for the environment. I'll try and pronounce this correctly, imidacloprid, a neonicotinoid highly toxic to bees, was banned in the UK from 2018, yet has been found on potatoes, peas and grapes imported from several countries. As with lower welfare imports, the UK will face pressure to weaken our domestic pesticide standards to secure new trade deals. Pesticide Action Network have highlighted some potential pitfalls over the India trade deal, particularly as India allows the use of 62% more pesticides classed as highly hazardous than the UK. I'd be grateful if the Minister could confirm that is being kept under review. We know what happens when we compromise our standards for trade. I'm afraid the Conservatives did it often. Their flawed Australia agreement increased sheep meat exports by 162%, despite many Australian lambs being subject to live skin cuttings without anaesthetic in a painful process known as mulesing, banned in the UK by the last Labour government. Our sheep farmers certainly didn't thank the party opposite for the impact that trade deal had and is still having on their livelihoods. And with the US reportedly demanding the UK adopt lower standards in trade talks, I'm glad that we have been clear in response that our food standards are a red line and that we have committed to high food, animal welfare and environmental standards in any deal. That is exactly the approach we need, but we must be consistent about it. Change has support across the board, notably from the NFU and animal welfare bodies like Animal Policy International, both of whom I want to thank for their ongoing work in this area. This has strong support across the political divide. There are massive majorities of Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrat voters that support banning imports of animal products produced by farming methods banned in the UK. So what does change look like in practice? All campaigners and the public want is consistency, to ensure that all agricultural products sold in the UK, whether domestic or imported, adhere to British welfare and quality standards. If it's not good enough to be produced in Britain, it shouldn't be sold here either. And legally, there's precedent in several areas. Slaughter standards are consistent, with certification required to ensure that imports are slaughtered to at least to standards equivalent in the UK. Shark fin imports and exports are completely banned. The Ivory Act 2018 bans the import of ivory products. We ban the import and sale of cat and dog fur. There are numerous precedents that can be applied here, and it makes sense to do it across the board. World Trade Organisation case law says that the UK can apply its animal welfare standards to imports, and the UK Trade and Agriculture Commission has confirmed that the UK's free trade agreements do not prevent us from implementing stricter import regulations based on welfare standards. So can I ask the Minister if she will consider legislation to require imported animal products to meet British welfare standards, as we already do for slaughter standards? Aligning imports with our domestic standards is backed by farmers, backed by consumers, backed across the political spectrum, and backed by rural, environmental and animal welfare organisations. We have strong legislative precedent. We have legal clarity. We know that the impact on prices would be negligible. We know that our economy would benefit. We would have confidence in the welfare of our animal products. We would have confidence in the quality of fruits and vegetables on shop shelves. These are big, tangible benefits. Taking action would do so much for Lloyd and Matt in my constituency and the thousands of others like them across Great Britain and Northern Ireland. This government has shown promising signs so far. Let's build on that and take the next crucial step.
The question is, as on the order paper, Charlie Dewhirst.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think I'd like to start by sort of scene setter about why we import so much food and why we aren't self-sufficient, because we're never going to be self-sufficient in food, when certainly not in bananas or avocados, for example. And also in some of the meat sectors, we will not be self-sufficient. And while we do produce very large quantities of lamb and of beef. In pork, for example, we're only 58% self-sufficient. I think it's a little more in poultry. But in pork, if we were 100% self-sufficient, we would have to export so much more to achieve a carcass balance and to achieve value for the farmer from the pig that actually it would be quite a challenge. As a great nation of bacon butty lovers, we do eat a lot of bacon to the extent that we have to import a certain amount of bacon. Therefore, we are exporting other cuts of a pig, such as belly pork, to Europe and fifth quarter to China. And all of that adds value and achieves a better price for our hard-working farmers. The other thing I think it's important to point out today and to make sure that when we are talking about these matters, when we talk about SPS agreements, that doesn't cover some of the issues we've discussed around welfare. They are separate. And some of the challenges we have with those agreements, and our trade negotiators are very much aware of this, is obviously you can fall foul of World Trade Organization rules if you tell another country what welfare standards you expect them to employ, and you can find yourself in difficulties over that. So we need to be conscious when doing any agreements with other countries, any trade agreements, that we would only allow market access where we are satisfied that those standards have been met. Now, in terms of EU-UK import-export relations and livestock and meat, at the moment, obviously, we are of a relatively similar welfare standard at the moment. I don't, this is in no way a criticism of the member of North West Cambridgeshire. It's all quite technical, but the sow stalls are not the same as farrowing crates. The sow stall ban, which I'll come to in 1999, was a challenge because the EU didn't implement it immediately, caused us a lot of problems. Farrowing crates are a topic of conversation at the moment. It's part of the animal welfare strategy the government has published, and it's something the industry has been working on very closely for a number of years now, because there are around 60,000 traditional farrowing crate in place in the UK. To convert those to a sort of freedom farrowing system requires planning permission. It requires you to, you can't just pull it out and replace it. It's going to be a huge challenge, and I think what I hope the Minister is aware of, because the issue we had in 1999 with the sow stall ban was that there was not a sufficient transition period. And I hesitate that the Minister is experienced enough. She was here at the time. Yes, you were there. And we lost 50% of the British pig industry. That didn't mean that we ate 50% less pork. It meant we just imported a load more from abroad. So whatever happens and whatever measures are taken through, whether it's on pigs or poultry or anything else, it's really, really important that what we don't do is reduce our domestic food production, lower our food security, reduce British jobs in farming and replace it with jobs abroad, meat produced abroad, often to standards that we would not like. And that's going to be a key issue, actually, as the government takes forward its animal welfare strategy, to ensure that we don't diverge or move too far ahead of European Union producers, because we are reliant on a huge amount of meat to come from the European Union. And if we put our farmers at greater cost in terms of production, then we are going to disadvantage them, and naturally that will be displaced. So I think it is really, really important. I think the discussion, and the honourable member's right to raise the US as well. The US does still have sow stalls, which, as we say, banned 27 years ago in this country. They do not have ambitious targets to reduce antibiotics like we have, and we've reduced, in the pig industry, they've reduced it by 69% since 2015. So making real progress without the intervention of government and a recognition that we do need to use fewer antibiotics. The issue with that is it adds cost, it lowers your production levels because you're not able to use these outdated methods, particularly with the sow stalls, and that puts us at a cost of disadvantage with some of these trading partners. So when it comes to the US, and I was closely involved with the negotiations on the Canada deal in my previous life before being elected to this place, and that was a similar challenge. They have methods that we wouldn't accept, and with that in certain areas. In fact, in pigs specifically in the Australia deal, they were not included at all. Because we felt that their standards were not sufficiently high enough to import. So I know that the Minister is definitely aware of this, and I think it's important that we all work together to ensure that any moves we take on trade and food imports, we should always be mindful that we protect the great British farmer. Thank you.
Lee Pitcher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In Doncaster East and the Isle of Axholme, agriculture is both a key part of our local economy and of our identity. The Isle of Axholme alone consists of around 50,000 acres characterised by a mix of intensive agricultural land, including significant arable land, and a historical, unique system of open field strip farming, particularly around parishes like Haxey and Epworth. By one farmer in Eland, I've been categorically assured that we have the best soil for growing the tastiest spuds in the world. So when it comes to neeps and tatties for Burns Night festivities over this weekend, you know where to come and shop. Now, no one takes life up as a farmer because they want it an easy time. Farming is hard, farmers pour their heart and soul into their land. I know that from my wife's family. I see that from my window at home, up before the break of dawn and out after the owls have emerged. My farmers meet the rules, they pay for assurance, inspections and traceability, but when it comes time to sell their crops, their meat and their products, they find they are not on a level playing field. They are undercut by imports produced to lower standards at a lower cost. And that, Madam Deputy Speaker, It's just not right. So over the last year or so, I've spent a significant amount of time understanding that. Out with my farmers in the constituency, I've visited farms across Doncaster, East and the Isle of Axholme, attended round tables with local farmers, held surgery appointments, attended farmers' shows, markets and fairs, and hosted several here in Westminster. And I'm hoping to meet our Epworth and District Young Farmers Network soon, who are currently raising money for the Yorkshire Air Ambulance and the Lindsay Lodge Hospice, and attending the first ever Isle Country Show in the autumn. I've spent time listening directly to their concerns being raised, and I want to feed back clearly here today to the Minister in Parliament about what they are telling me and what we can do to support them. So I'm going to give you some examples that they have shared with me, Madam Deputy Speaker. So let's take grain for a start. Grain merchants can import grain that is not red tractor assured and too often arrives without the paperwork you would expect for something going into our food chain. UK grain is grown to a higher standards than that matters, and that also really matters. But it also costs more to produce. So when imports come in cheaper, it drives prices down below the production costs here that we have. And when UK assured grain is then bulked out with imported grain, it makes a mockery of the premium that our farmers have earned through the quality that they are producing. Or potatoes. I've already mentioned them, but we can grow excellent potatoes in this country, yet we see vast quantities imported from as far as Portugal simply to shave costs. And that's madness when you factor in the distance, the carbon, and the message it sends to domestic producers who are doing the right thing day in, day out. The same story is being repeated in beef. When we bring imports produced to lower welfare standards and a scale that drives down unit costs, we are effectively punishing British farmers for maintaining higher welfare and traceability. And there are double standards on crop protection. Oilseed rape has become far harder to grow successfully here after key plant protection products were banned, leaving growers exposed to pests like cabbage stem flea beetles. Yet imported crops can be treated with products that our farmers are not allowed to use. That is not a level playing field, and I'm going to keep repeating that as we go on. It is a tilted one. Finally, sugar. We have sugar beet growers close to processing plants in this country, sustaining jobs and local supply chains. Yet sugarcane can be imported from countries where it's been treated with chemicals that have been banned here, but then are processed in the UK, and I'm told end up on our supermarket shelves with packaging covered in a Union flag that implies British provenance. So I'm calling on the government to do 3 things for our farming community today, and I would love the Minister to be able to respond to those if she can. We need stronger equivalence in our import standards. If a product cannot be produced here under the rules, it should not be able to undercut our farmers on our shelves. We need robust enforcement and paperwork checks at the border, because standards on paper are meaningless without compliance in practice. And we need honest, clear labelling that protects British trademarks and gives consumers the information they need, not marketing that blurs the origin or standards of what they are buying. UK farmers are frequently inspected, licensed and held to higher welfare and environmental rules. That delivers food that is safe, traceable and trusted. The least we can do is ensure our trade and import regime rewards that efforts rather than undermining it. Let's help our farmers be able to plough their fields successfully in the future by levelling up the playing field for them right now. Thank you.
And Davies.
Madam Dirprwy Llefarydd. Firstly, may I refer the House to my register of interest. As most of you know, I'm a dairy and sheep farmer from West Wales. And I'm very much aware of the volatility of market and the effect that this has on our sector. Sheep and beef prices have been steady for the last year or so, but dairy has absolutely crashed in the last, since August, September, down by between 9 and 12 pence a litre, which is around 25 to 30% of income, with inputs, of course, remaining exactly the same. That's unsustainable. And the welfare standards we adhere to when producing foods here is exemplary, and standards continue to rise. However, while setting even higher standards at home, we allow the import of products produced in countries with lower standards. Animal welfare strategies like that announced for England last month highlight the link between welfare standards and food security, with the public agreeing that imported food must be equal in standard to home-produced food. But this has to be mirrored in trade agreements which are being negotiated. Our farming community cannot be traded off, as has happened in the American deal. The farming community deserve no less than equality in standards, and my Caerfyrddin farmers certainly deserve no less than equality in standards. Interestingly, the CLA acquired some figures through a Freedom of Information request to see how many local authorities and government departments procured UK and local food, and if these organisations had a policy actually to buy local food. Only one government department, the FCDO, had a policy, and only one other government department, the Department of Health and Social Care, could say how much local food they procured. Of the 215 local authorities, only 26 were able to provide information on the amount of UK or local food they procured, and this really isn't good enough. If we only produce 60% of what we consume, and if we can support locally produced food, then we will import less. Locally in Caerfyrddin, Cymru County Council are working hard to ensure that we put locally produced food onto the public plate. And this work is being done on a council-owned farm in partnership with Social Farms and Gardens, Castell Hywel Foods and Hywel Dda Health Board and others, in order to give our children and elderly top-quality vegetables. And if we can do this in Carmarthenshire, then surely more councils can support our local agricultural community in this way. Sustainably produced, fresh, nutritionally dense food is what we all need and deserve. So to close, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are all aware that we import around 40% of the food that we consume. But none of this food is subject to minimal animal welfare or environmental production standards. Import standards are almost entirely related to product safety and their threat to human health and the environment, rather than how they are produced. Establishing animal welfare and environmental core standards will ensure that the food we eat, whether it's produced here at home or abroad, meets high expectations of British consumers. With core standards implemented alongside balanced and commercially meaningful trade deals, international trade can not only drive economic growth, but can help our farmers become sustainable, resilient and supported businesses. Josh Newbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much thank my honourable friend, the member for North West Cambridgeshire, for securing this vital debate and for his very thoughtful speech, and I extend that actually to other honourable members who've spoken in this debate too. It's an important opportunity for us to consider an issue that sits at the intersection of the food we eat, trade, animal welfare and the sustainability of our rural economy. The UK's post-Brexit free trade agreements have rightly opened up new opportunities for British exporters, but they've also raised concerns about how imports are produced, particularly as we look to increase our level of ambition on welfare. By cutting tariffs on agricultural products from partner countries, those deals can unintentionally allow products to enter the UK that are produced to far lower animal welfare or environmental standards than those expected of our farmers. And these aren't minor issues. They go to the heart of how we support our brilliant domestic producers and how we maintain public confidence in the food we eat. Practices that are banned or tightly regulated in the UK, like conventional battery cages for hens, sow stalls, tail docking of pigs and certain pesticides, remain permitted elsewhere, and those products inevitably end up on our supermarket shelves. Without clear protections, imports produced in this way risk undercutting our farmers, and they undermine the principle that high welfare production should be the norm, not just for British producers. The Trade and Agriculture Commission, which advises the government on trade deals, has highlighted these differences and warned that they have both ethical and economic consequences. British farmers investing in high welfare, sustainable production should not be left competing on an uneven playing field against imports produced by more cheaply by cutting corners. And that applies to raw materials as well as finished products. On Tuesday, the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee that I sit on heard from the formidable Baroness Batters about her profitability review, and she mentioned a comment made by Sir Liam Fox, who, when he was Trade Secretary, argued that post-Brexit the UK should shift to importing cheaply produced raw materials and then add value to them under the Union flag. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I agree with Baroness Batters that we should reject that reductive view of the value of the excellent raw materials our British farmers produce. We should be proud of and protect them as well. Many organisations, including the NFU and the National Pig Association, have called for core standards for imported agri-food products. These standards would ensure that all food sold in the UK, whether domestic or imported, meets the welfare, environmental and production standards expected by the British public. It's entirely reasonable for consumers to expect that pork, beef, eggs or poultry, for example, produced abroad, meet very similar or the same requirements as those produced here. But two other realities that we have to confront in this debate, and which the APPG for UK Food Security, which I chair, has discussed at length, are the cost of food and keeping our shelves stocked. As someone who represents a constituency with pockets of deep deprivation, including neighbourhoods in the 5% most deprived in the country, I'm concerned that a rapid move to equalise all import standards could have a knock-on effect on affordability of food, which, as I'm sure honourable members right across the House will be aware, has been very high, particularly over the last 5 years. Equally, we don't want to see a repeat of the empty shelves that we all remember during the pandemic, which brought home the fragility of just-in-time food supply chains when unexpected disruption hits. But as the member for North West Cambridgeshire said, though, these issues are interlinked, and the more we undermine our domestic supply, the more prices will go up and the more reliant we will become on overseas imports. The government has recognised these varied concerns. In the trade strategy published last June, it was clear that the government will uphold high animal welfare standards and will not lower food standards to accommodate imports. It explicitly acknowledges practices that are not allowed domestically, like sow stalls and battery cages, and commits to assessing whether those imports have an unfair advantage. I hope it will find that they do. Where necessary, powers like quotas, exclusions and safeguards will be used to protect domestic sectors that are most at risk. This approach is welcome. It strikes a balance between maintaining the benefits of free trade and ensuring that British farmers are not undermined. But as we've seen in previous trade deals, including in discussions with the United States, it's vital that these protections are clear, enforceable and applied consistently. Without them, we risk creating a market where the lowest welfare products set the price, not the highest standards. Equally important is transparency for consumers. Recent polling by Opinion for Humane World for Animals shows that the British public often misunderstand what products labelled as, for example, welfare assured or carry the red tractor logo actually guarantee. For example, 65% of people incorrectly believe that welfare assured prohibits pigs and chickens from being kept in cages, and 67% believe it prohibits the use of CO2 for slaughter. If consumers discover that labelling doesn't match the reality they think it does, nearly half would feel misled, angry or disappointed. So clearly, mandatory labelling is vital. It will protect consumers, supports domestic producers and ensures that imported products adhere to the same high standards, or at least we can see if they don't. Public support for stronger labelling measures is overwhelming, with 77% backing a new animal welfare labelling law and 3/4 supporting stricter enforcement by Trading Standards and the Advertising Standards Authority to prevent misleading claims. Now, I acknowledge that getting labelling right will require so many tricky balances, and there's only so much space on a packet as well. I don't downplay those issues. But by combining robust import standards with transparent labelling, the government can ensure that trade works for farmers, for animals and for consumers alike, reinforcing confidence in the British food system while maintaining fairness and ethical standards. And I'll give way.
Member for giving way, and I think he highlights a really important point about the challenges of potential welfare labelling and the fact that if our imports are not labelled in the same way, in which they probably would not be because it wouldn't be possible to do that, that could put British producers at a disadvantage in terms of what a consumer might think and how something has been produced. So we just need to be conscious of that, I think.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and he is absolutely right. We need to be very careful when we're considering this how that will affect imported goods and therefore what the consumer sees in the supermarket. My take is that if we maybe educate consumers on what we are labelling in terms of our standards, and therefore, if those labels are absent, what the implications might be for imported products. We can better inform them and also protect our own domestic producers. I think that's something that will inevitably have to go alongside any work on improved labelling for our products. Yes, briefly.
Still agree with me that actually, if we can unify our import standards with our domestic standards, that problem disappears in many ways because they'll be the same, and therefore we won't have the labelling that could undermine our farmers.
I would agree with him, but I would also point out that there will inevitably be some producers who want to produce to higher standards than the minimum, particularly in this country. And I think they should be fairly recognised for that and rewarded for that. So I think there will always be a need for a clear, transparent labelling system. Getting that right, as I said, will be tricky, but I think it's really important that farmers who are producing to higher standards get the fair recompense for that. And I too hope that the Minister might be able to update the House on where work on labelling has got to so that consumers can make informed choices for them and their families. But ultimately, this is about more than import-export figures on a screen. It's about fairness for our farmers, transparency for consumers, and the sustainability of our whole food system. As this House debates the impact of import standards, I urge the Government to continue its firm commitment to core standards and to ensure that free trade agreements work for farmers, consumers and British values alike. Thank you.
Adrian Ramsay.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for North West Cambridgeshire for leading this important debate. The UK prides itself on having some of the highest animal welfare standards in the world, and I have welcomed last month's animal welfare strategy, which promises to go further still. I particularly welcome the planned ban on farrowing crates for sows and cages for hens. These are crucial, important steps forward in our animal protection in this country, and I've called on the Government to set out clear timescales for their delivery and support for farmers during this transition. The animal welfare strategy reflects years of campaigning by animal protection organisations and growing public demand for change, and marks a significant step forward with real commitments on animal welfare standards. But there are some glaring gaps too. What is illegal to produce here, because it's too cruel, remains legal to import and sell. That is incoherent, it undermines public confidence, and it leaves higher welfare British farmers facing unfair competition. The principle should be straightforward. If a practice is too cruel to produce in Britain, it should be too cruel to import into Britain. Yet the reality tells a different story. 97% of our pork imports come from countries where sow stalls are still legal, despite the practice being illegal here for 25 years. Battery cages may be banned here, but they remain widespread elsewhere, and imports of eggs have increased more than 12-fold in the last year alone. Since the Australia trade deal was signed, lamb imports have risen by over 160%, despite cruel practices such as mulesing, illegal here, remaining common there. This is not a niche concern. According to the RSPCA and the Compassion in World Farming, 95% of countries with UK market access have lower animal welfare standards than the UK. HMRC data shows non-EU imports of eggs have more than tripled since 2020. Poultry imports have risen by 60% and pork by over 80%. In trade discussions with the United States administration, ministers focused on food safety and sanitary standards, but this focus risks leaving a huge loophole for imports produced in ways that would be illegal here, widening the welfare gap instead of closing it. And while the UK will maintain its ban, rightly, on hormone-treated beef and chlorine-washed chicken coming from the US, it was looking to compromise in other areas. Higher welfare British farmers are paying the price. The NFU has been clear. Farmers want trade deals, but not at the expense of being undercut by food produced to standards that would be illegal on their own farms. Over 90% of British livestock farmers support restricting low welfare imports. And the public agrees. More than 4 in 5 people support banning imports produced using methods outlawed here. We need a statutory requirement that animal products sold in the UK, whether produced here or imported, meet British welfare standards. We also need mandatory welfare labelling that applies equally to imports. The Animal Welfare Strategy's consultation commitments on this don't go far enough. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd be grateful if the Minister could set out how the Government intends to close this loophole and ensure our individual trade deals and overall policy fully reflects the ambition that's rightly included in the animal welfare strategy. The standards of our higher welfare British farmers at home should not be undermined by lower welfare standards abroad. We should not be importing cruelty, and our farmers deserve a level playing field.
Jogee.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Isn't it wonderful to get to Thursday? Business runs fast, no time limit, and some time to go, Madam Deputy Speaker. Rejoice. I shall rejoice. Whether you all do, Madam Deputy Speaker, will be a different matter. This has been an excellent debate, and I particularly enjoyed the speech from the Honourable Lady from West Wales. I went through her constituency last summer on the way to go and see my honourable friend from Mid and South Pembrokeshire, so next time I shall stop off for a cuppa and we can see her in action, Madam Deputy Speaker. And like my honourable friend from Doncaster, I married a woman from a family of farmers, so I well know his experience and shared interest in these issues. Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend from North West Cambridgeshire gave an excellent speech to open this debate, but I want to focus my remarks on the farming industry and the brilliant farmers in Newcastle-under-Lyme. And for the House's information, I too, like our honourable friend, the member for North West Leicestershire, on the National Farmers Union Fellowship Scheme this year, and am the Vice Chair of the International Trade All-Party Parliamentary Group. Madam Deputy Speaker, as you've heard me say before, Newcastle-under-Lyme is an age-old market town in North Staffordshire, and it's surrounded by the green rolling hills for which England is known and of which we are all proud, Wales too, of course. And I promise every single farmer I met in the months and years before the general election and in the time since that I do whatever I could to support farmers in Newcastle-under-Lyme, Staffordshire and across our country, and that means defending our standards every single day. That's why this debate is important, and so I thank my honourable friend for bringing it to the House today. That's why I'm also, Madam Deputy Speaker, pleased that we got to the right place on APR and the inheritance tax threshold for farmers and farming families. There has been much commentary on this issue and much genuine concern felt by farmers in my constituency and those up and down the United Kingdom, but a number of us raised it loudly, repeatedly and thankfully effectively, and thanks go to the NFU and all the farmers in my patch who spoke out, and as I say, I'm grateful to colleagues in government for ensuring we are now in the right place. It's why I also set up my Farmers Forum soon after the general election, because after years of being let down and forgotten, I wanted my farmers back home in Newcastle-under-Lyme to get the hearing they deserve, the support they need, and the opportunities to thrive, to keep us fed, and to keep going. There is, Madam Deputy Speaker, so much in our United Kingdom that we should be proud of, and Britain's farmers are just one example, and I'm sure that, I feel sure that Staffordshire and our farmers, particularly those in Newcastle-under-Lyme, are leading the way. They are the backbone of our food system, they tend to our land, they produce the clear majority of what ends up on our dinner tables, and they allow us all to feel a sense of pride. Their contribution underpins our food security and strengthens rural economies. Take the Speeds, Madam Deputy Speaker, at Betley Hall Farm, who are responsible for a brilliant fireworks display in November each year and the Betley Show each August, and all colleagues, Madam Deputy Speaker, including yourself, will be very welcome to come and join the festivities this year. Or the Kennelly's Plumtree Park Farm, where you get grass-fed lamb boxes supplied seasonally, as well as the dog playground. They've diversified their offer to consumers, to their neighbours and to our community, and helped put our part of the world on the map. And so I hope my honourable friend, the Minister, will come and see these success stories in Newcastle-under-Lyme for herself before too long. I am, Madam Deputy Speaker, firmly of the view that we should always buy British. That's smart and necessary for our farmers and for the future of British farming. It's also good for our pubs, our shops and our restaurants, and I hope that colleagues on the front bench, not this Minister, there's plenty for her to do, but others, will do what the previous Conservative government didn't do and get a hold of the challenges facing the hospitality sector in Newcastle-under-Lyme and across the nation, and ensure the support for our town centres and local businesses is delivered quickly and speedily. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I just want to, as I make that call, to support those businesses who are in turn supported by our farmers and our farming sector locally, want to just think about the brilliant local businesses who stand with our farmers every single day, Madam Deputy Speaker. Take Plant and Wilson in Newcastle-under-Lyme town centre are wonderful family butchers, which of course gets meat from our farms, both locally and up and down the kingdom. Pubs like the Swan in Betley, the Albert in town, all moments away from farms tended to by brilliant farmers, Madam Speaker, and I suspect where some of those brilliant farmers enjoy a pint or two from time to time. The Butcher's Arms in Audley, where Mark, the landlord, is known for his excellent cooking prowess, again using British food from British farms, Madam Speaker, many of whom are located in Staffordshire. The Archery in Wolstanton, where I've also seen, and when you think about the standards, Madam Speaker, required for the meat and food that we eat in the pubs I've referred to and people enjoy up and down our country, I think it's important that we make sure, as I said at the beginning of my remarks, that we make the case for the highest and strongest British standards every step of the way. Now, Madam Speaker, I see you enjoying my speech so much you almost threw me off course.
On that point,
I will happily give way to my honourable friend.
When we talk about food standards, we're also talking about the kind of food and the quality of food that we get in our public services. And would you agree with me that one of the best things that we can do and push forward with is making sure that as contracts fade out for our government services, that the food is locally produced and we make sure that at least 50% of that is bought locally?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think my honourable friend makes an excellent point. If I think about the example of the Royal Stoke Hospital, which is across the road from my constituency border, but is staffed by and serves the vast majority of my constituents, making sure that the patients at that hospital, the workers at the hospital, are able to enjoy the highest of standards, the best of British food, is, I think, an excellent point, and I feel sure the Minister will agree and make that clear in her sum-up. Now, Madam Speaker, constantly thinking about the impact and benefits of the highest of British standards, it makes me want to highlight just how important it is for us to remember that the issues facing the agriculture sector and British farmers, who work day in, day out to deliver the highest of standards, didn't start in July 2024. The price of milk, trade deals that undercut our farmers, access to labour are just some of the long-standing challenges the Honourable Lady from West Wales pointed out in her remarks too. The farmers like her and many in Newcastle-under-Lyme working to the highest of British standards have been forced to endure for far too long. Not to mention, Madam Speaker, that under the previous government there was a £358 million underspend in the agricultural budget across the last 3 years of that government, and I hope that my friend the Minister will confirm that under this Labour government farmers will always receive the support they need, not just to maintain the highest of British standards, Madam Deputy Speaker, but to make sure that food production is more sustainable and more profitable. And whilst the Conservatives sold out and undercut farmers and trade deals, and we mustn't forget that, Madam Deputy Speaker, I urge my colleagues in government to continue their principled approach, because as my honourable friend from Doncaster has pointed out, we must always back British standards, we must always back British food, and we should never bargain either away. We must never sign trade deals that leave our farmers in Newcastle-under-Lyme exposed or allow lower quality imports to undercut what British producers deliver day in and day out, and to the best of standards. Madam Speaker, there is a very big and serious export potential for British food, and I want people right across the world to buy British, to eat British, and to benefit from the highest of British standards. Now, I'm co-chair, Madam Deputy Speaker, of the Commonwealth All Party Parliamentary Group, and I urge colleagues in government, and I know the Minister and the Secretary of State are planning targeted overseas missions, but I urge them to look at the Commonwealth as a default partner of choice, because we already have age-old historical ties, but more importantly, as we look to ensure that we export British-produced goods to the highest of standards, we are benefiting as much as we can. And can I also suggest to the Minister that she speaks to her colleagues in the Department for Business and Trade to ensure that all our trade envoys are banging the drum for British food, because British food is produced to the highest of standards, which we know the world can only look to for inspiration. And while Scottish salmon is the Kingdom's leading food export, I hope the Minister will do whatever she can to help me increase exports of Staffordshire oatcakes, because the world deserves nothing less, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, simply put, we must protect our farmers, we must uphold our standards, and we must back British food at home and abroad. Madam Deputy Speaker, notwithstanding the challenges over APR, I welcome the steps being taken by the Government to give British farmers the tools, investment and confidence they need to thrive. We're creating a new Farming and Food Partnership Board chaired by my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for the Environment. And this board will bring together farmers, processors, retailers and the government so that those working on our land have a real voice in how policy is made and how we can always maintain the highest of British standards. We rely on trade, Madam Deputy Speaker, to complement what we grow here, to give families year-round choice, to help stabilise prices, to protect our supply chains when global shocks are hit, and, I know the Minister will agree with me, to make sure that the highest of British standards are maintained to and supported. We won't always get everything right, and nor will we always make everyone happy, Madam Deputy Speaker, but we do need to listen to our farmers and our food producers, because they're the ones who are flying the flag for the highest of standards. They're the ones who we need to make sure are not undercut when food comes from elsewhere with lower standards. And my message to farmers and producers in Newcastle-under-Lyme is that this government and me hear them loud and clear, and they have our full support.
I now call the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Sarah Dyke.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate the Honourable Member for North West Cambridgeshire on securing this really important debate. And I'd also like to thank the Backbench Business Committee for finding the time for this debate to proceed. Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK agricultural sector has experienced an enormous shift on leaving the European Union. There was simply no plan in place for farming and international trade, and the post-Brexit era has seen 7 different DEFRA Secretaries of State and 5 different Prime Ministers. And as Baroness Batters said in her recent farming profitability review, this has led to a complete lack of constant political direction at a time when farming needed it the most. Nothing has done more to increase the cost of farming and to reduce farm incomes than the Conservatives' botched Brexit. And it has harmed and undermined protections for animal welfare and the environment. But the Conservative government didn't stop there. In addition, they set a dangerous precedent for future trade agreements in how they went about in their negotiations. Stripping away parliamentary scrutiny and forcing terrible deals through have given unfair advantaged imports from countries with much poorer standards, which would fail to meet the high-quality British production standards. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Liberal Democrats demand that every new trade deal should be subject to proper scrutiny. But this government's refusal to do so in their latest trade agreement with President Trump, despite calling for proper oversight while in opposition, is a reminder that Parliament hasn't yet taken back control. Now, I'm proud to come from a farming background. My family have farmed in and around Somerset for over 250 years, and my brother continues the family business. Now, he, like all farmers, take great pride in what they do, and despite much turbulence in the industry, they work hard to provide the nation with food for our tables, and in large part remain resilient to most market shocks. But bad trade deals have allowed butter and cheese imports from Australia, New Zealand and the United States start to land on our shores in increasing volumes, flooding our domestic markets at the expense of British farmers. Yet these products are under no obligation to have point of origin labelling. And this has inevitably led to UK milk buyers slashing farm gate milk prices to a level that is simply unacceptable and unsustainable. Now, I recently met with Rich Clothier, MBE, the MD of family-run White Farms near Bruton. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure that you will join me in congratulating Rich, having recently been appointed an MBE for services to sustainable agriculture and food production in the King's New Year's Honours List. White Farms is one of the UK's largest independent cheese producers, crafting award-winning cheddar and butter from Somerset for now over 160 years. And under Richard's guidance, it now exports products to more than 160 countries. And Rich recently told me that people want to eat food produced to British standards of welfare, environmental and food safety. But currently, they have no way of knowing and being able to make that choice. And that is what is important, to ensure that our consumers know what they are buying and they're able to make that choice. But because of Brexit and the government are now forced into agreeing poor trade deals that continue to undermine British farmers and the food that they produce. Madam Deputy Speaker, over the past few months, milk prices have been in freefall, leaving many dairy farmers on a financial cliff edge. Milk prices currently are well below the cost of production, and we've seen thousands of litres of milk being thrown down the drain, and I fear there will be much more to come over the next few months if we don't do something about it. Madam Deputy Speaker, given the absence of point of origin labelling in our trade policy, products are often offered to customers without appropriate labelling, allowing them to masquerade as UK produced. This is why I introduced the Dairy Farming and Dairy Products Bill that would force the government to ensure that any trade deals do not negatively impact British dairy farmers. Liberal Democrats have also been keen to ensure farmers and growers receive fair treatment in the supply chain, as existing protections are no longer sufficient to tackle unfair practices by large buyers. We want to reform and strengthen the grocery code adjudicator, merge it with the agricultural supply chain adjudicator, and give it greater powers and resources. Madam Deputy Speaker, a sensible trade policy that ensures British consumers are protected from imported food produced at lower standards would be illegal for British farmers to operate as it is required. Now, Liberal Democrats are champions of free trade. We know the benefits it brings British farmers and businesses, but we also know that regulatory alignment is key to this. We cannot allow British farmers to be undercut by cheaper imports. However, soon Canada will ratify the UK CPTPP membership, which worryingly could open the doors to products from farming systems that are banned here and further undermine British farming. Madam Deputy Speaker, battery cages have been rightly banned in the UK since 2012, but the CPTPP agreement could allow Mexican farmers who use battery cages to export a large number of eggs to the UK, and these eggs will be produced in a manner that would simply be illegal here. This would force farms like Silverthorne Farm near Melbourne Port, who have 15,000 hens, who are all free to roam over their 32 acres, to compete with lower standard imports that operate at a fraction of the cost. The government have recently released their animal welfare strategy after promising the largest increase in standards in a generation. Now, while the Liberal Democrats have long called for and support many of the measures the government have announced, the strategy lacks a commitment to protect UK food security and farmers through trade policy. Madam Deputy Speaker, DEFRA have stated that they will consider whether overseas producers have an unfair advantage, and unfortunately it's clear, I'm afraid, that the answer is yes, they do. And it's worth recalling that one former Environment Minister slammed the UK-Australia deal, saying the UK gave away far too much for far too little, while another one described it as not very good for British farmers. Now, I am glad that the government is prepared to use the full range of powers at its disposal to protect the most sensitive sectors, as there is little doubt this is needed. The government must urgently renegotiate the Australia and New Zealand trade deals to uphold high standards on food safety, animal welfare, health and the environment. And if these standards cannot be met, we should withdraw from such deals. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Liberal Democrats are clear that an SPS agreement with the EU is an absolute priority to cut red tape, reduce checks and lower costs for exporters. And we've called for an agreement to be delivered as soon as possible and to be modelled on the existing EU-Swiss veterinary deal, guaranteeing enhanced access to the single market with minimal checks. We also want a bespoke UK-EU customs union to rebuild our economy and support British producers with tariff-free movement of goods between EU member states, strengthening domestic economic growth. A far more ambitious, free and fair trade deal with Europe is an absolute necessity. It will give the government some kind of financial scope it needs to keep at least a few more of its promises to improve our vital public services. But any upcoming agreement does pose some risks to British farmers, as any agreement could limit the UK's ability to apply our own standards for imports, which is why the Liberal Democrats are calling for the Swiss model based on mutual recognition of animal health measures to be replicated here. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Conservatives sold British farmers down the river in their desperation to agree trade deals based on arbitrary deadlines, but there is now an opportunity to properly protect British welfare standards in all future deals. And this must be at the forefront of this government's minds in all future negotiations, as it is critical for UK farming, UK food security and national security.
Shadow Minister Dr Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I start by thanking the Honourable Member for North West Cambridgeshire for securing and excellently opening this important debate, offering members across the House the opportunity to discuss an issue central to our national interest and indeed to our values. The speeches we have heard today reflect the deep commitment across this House to our farmers, our food standards, animal welfare, the environment and the integrity of British agriculture. We've heard a range of contributions today. My honourable friend from Bridlington and the Wolds, and I pay tribute to his expertise coming in from the pig industry, and I thank him for his work on the EFRA Select Committee. He talked about the complexities of the global trade in meat, the importance of food security and a sensible transition on husbandry regulations, and also he touched on inappropriate antibiotic use, and I will touch on that, Madam Deputy Speaker, in due course. The Honourable Member for Doncaster East and the Isle of Axholme talked about the importance in the grain and the sugar sector in his part of the world, and the importance of transparency in labelling. My honourable friend, the member for Caerfyrddin, and I pay tribute to her and her family on the farm. Bringing that expertise into the House of Commons is just brilliant, and thank you for all you do. She talked very much importantly about welfare standards and food security and the importance of local food procurement. The honourable member for Cannock Chase, and I thank him for his excellent work on the EFRA Select Committee as well, and he talked about the importance of food security and again transparency in food labelling. The honourable member for Waveney Valley is a proud advocate talking about the importance of high animal welfare standards, and he talked about the important bans that we uphold on hormone-treated beef and chlorine-washed poultry, and I will touch on that in due course. And finally, the honourable member for Newcastle-under-Lyme, the importance of buying British and, very importantly, the importance of exporting British as well. So I thank him for his comments. Now, standards, Madam Deputy Speaker, are not abstract trade matters. They are questions of fairness, food security and, indeed, moral duty. British farmers are rightly proud of producing food to some of the highest animal welfare, environmental and safety standards in the world. They do so not only to comply with the law, but because it is right. It is therefore indefensible to allow them to be undercut by imports produced to standards that would be illegal in the United Kingdom. Now, I am proud of the record of the previous Conservative government in advancing animal welfare, such as banning the export of live animals, including cattle, sheep, pigs and horses for fattening or slaughter with the Animal Welfare Livestock Exports Act 2024, increasing the maximum prison sentence for animal cruelty from 6 months to 5 years with the Animal Welfare Sentencing Act 2021, and importantly enshrining animal sentience into UK law with the Animal Welfare Sentience Act 2022, and thereby establishing the Animal Sentience Committee such that any new legislation that we consider must pay due regard to animal welfare. I was also very proud to co-sponsor the Conservative-initiated Animal Welfare Import of Dogs, Cats and Ferrets Act 2025 to tackle the cruel puppy smuggling trade and the horrific practice of dog ear cropping. In the United Kingdom, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have brilliant farmers who farm to the highest animal welfare standards, and we should be very proud of that fact. And as I've said many times before in this House, we can be a beacon to the rest of the world on this. British farmers follow strict rules on banning growth promoters, on housing and welfare conditions, and on environmental protections. Now, these standards carry costs and responsibilities that farmers accept because they reflect public values. The injustice arises when food produced to lower standards overseas is allowed to enter our market and compete directly with food produced under our higher rules. That does not raise global standards, it simply exports cruelty and imports unfair competition. Now, we Conservatives have consistently defended those standards. In 2024, when the Leader of the Opposition, my right honourable friend, the Member for North West Essex, served as the Secretary of State for Business and Trade, she suspended the trade talks with Canada after Canada insisted on included hormone-treated beef. That decision sent a clear message that the UK will not compromise on important bans, such as against hormone-treated beef, ractopamine-treated pork, or, as we've heard, chlorine-washed poultry, and indeed bovine somatotropin dairy, all of which remain illegal in the United Kingdom. These practices merely hide substandard and unacceptable, in some cases, husbandry methods, and are not positive at all for animal or indeed bird welfare. I was proud that the previous Conservative government stood firm with these bans on such products in our negotiations with Canada. I urge the current government to maintain that firm position on those bans. The United Kingdom has amongst the strictest welfare laws in the world. By contrast, countries such as Canada and the US still allow hens to be kept in battery cages. Here, 83% of eggs come from free-range or barn systems, and the government has committed to phase out all cages for laying hens by 2032. The opposition has made clear that we very much support banning cages or close confinement systems where there is clear scientific evidence that these are detrimental to animal and bird health and welfare. This is in keeping with much of the United Kingdom's existing legislation on the use of cages and crates, including on the ban of keeping calves in veal crates introduced in 1990, the ban of keeping sows in close confinement stalls in the UK introduced in 1999, and the ban on battery cages for hens in 2012. Under the previous Conservative government, ministers were clear that it was their ambition for farrowing crates to be no longer used for sows. Indeed, the new Pig Welfare Code clearly states the aim is for farrowing crates to no longer be necessary and for any new system to protect the welfare of the sow as well as her piglets. And I emphasise that, as well as her piglets. And it's important that the industry is heard, and we have, as we have heard today, a sensible, workable, pragmatic transition that works and upholds animal welfare. Future trade deals must insist on core standards, or we risk encouraging systems that our own laws reject. Transparency, Madam Deputy Speaker, also matters. Consumers should be able to see how their food was produced. The previous Conservative government consulted in 2024 on improved welfare and origin labelling. But the Labour government's animal welfare strategy released just before Christmas offers only vague intentions on labelling, with no timetable or binding commitments. Clear, mandatory labelling would empower UK consumers and reward UK farmers who do the right thing. I also want to highlight the emergence of products in the UK that do not meet our animal welfare and environmental standards, potentially as being compounded by the alarming situation facing our national biosecurity. With disturbing reports of foot and mouth disease emerging abroad, including in Europe last year, African swine fever advancing up the continent of Europe, and the ongoing outbreaks in this country of avian influenza and blue tongue virus, we must maintain our vigilance. After raising concerns in Parliament on 17 occasions, I was pleased the current government finally listened and agreed to commit to funding our vital Animal Plant and Health Agency Weybridge headquarters redevelopment, started by the Conservative government. I would like to thank the APHA, whom I visited again last month, for their tireless work, particularly in the face of the ongoing avian influenza situation. I'll give way.
I thank him for giving way. As the Member of Parliament who has the Animal Plant Health Agency in my constituency, confusingly named the Weybridge Centre, it's actually in Newhall. I'd just like to thank the Minister for his, the Shadow Minister for his advocacy on this and the Government for putting in the funding for the redevelopment.
I thank my honourable friend for his very kind intervention, and he proudly stands up for that important institution that I know that the Minister has visited, as has the Minister in the other place. And it's important cross-party that we support something that is so critical to our national security. But the very real consequences, Madam Deputy Speaker, for human and animal health from illegal meat imports, as we've heard today, are a disaster waiting to happen unless the government maintains vigilance and steps up now. Our ability to detect and seize illegal meat imports at our borders is being tested to its limits. According to DEFRA, between January and April 2025, the amount of illegal meat that had been seized, 72,872 kilograms, was close to that seized in the whole of 2024, 92,382 kilograms. Dover Port Health Authority alone has seized 367 tonnes since 2022. Now, given this ongoing threat, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is essential that sufficient funding is provided to our agencies at the border and that routine surveillance and spot checks can be carried out in Dover and other ports to prevent illegal meat and products of animal origins from entering the country. In addition to upholding our standards that we're talking about today and protecting our biosecurity and safeguarding animal welfare, it is vital, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the United Kingdom has enough veterinary surgeons. At this point, I must declare both a professional and a personal interest as a veterinary surgeon, a Fellow of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons and a graduate of Cambridge Veterinary School. And that point I'll raise further. The UK does not train enough vets domestically. Vets play a vital role, obviously, in animal health and welfare, which we've been talking a lot about today, but also in food safety, public health and disease control. Again, this all comes into this debate on standards. That is why I am deeply concerned about the possible closure of Cambridge Vet School, recommended by the Council of the University's School of Biological Sciences. Now, I know the Minister is very aware of this, as I've raised this with her in the Chamber and with her and her colleagues in DEFRA. We cannot maintain animal welfare or food security without adequate veterinary capacity, and I urge the government to act and press Cambridge University to stop this short-sighted possible closure. In addition, the Veterinary Surgeons Act of 1966 needs to be updated, and although it was mentioned in the government's animal welfare strategy, there was no timeline or indeed urgency. Again, please, Minister, I urge the government to act. The government's record, sadly, on supporting farmers gives us cause for concern. Just look at the treatment of the sector with their ill-judged and awful family farm tax, only partially U-turned. I don't believe we are still in the right place. There is much more we still need to do on that. By permitting imports imported under weaker standards, they also risk favouring overseas producers over British ones. Now, ministers say they are passionate about animal welfare and food standards, and I will take them on that. But both their record and their rhetorics tell slightly a different story. Their keenness to merge with the EU standards is worrying, especially on animal welfare, where our standards in the UK are higher. Returning to EU regulatory alignment would make us rule takers, not rule makers, preventing farmers from adopting innovations such as gene editing. Now, the Labour manifesto spoke about food security, but failed to set out a clear plan to protect farmers from low import standards. The Conservative government's Genetic Technology Precision Breeding Act of 2023 laid the foundations for the development of disease and climate-resilient crops and the breeding of animals and birds that are resistant to harmful diseases like avian influenza and PRRS, porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome. The landmark Animal Welfare Livestock Exports Act of 2024, as I've mentioned, ended the inhumane export of live animals for slaughter or fattening. These are important achievements. Yet we on this side of the House have concerns that these vital acts may be repealed, watered down or weakened because of the pursuit of this current government's reset with the EU. I hope the Minister today can assure the House that these safeguards will remain intact and we won't take a backward step on animal welfare and indeed innovation in the agricultural and food security sectors. We have already seen how sectors such as fishing can be treated as bargaining chips in international talks, with our UK fisheries sold away to Europe for 12 years to try and, at this stage in vain, get access to the European Defence Fund. Farmers are looking on closely and are understandably worried that agriculture could also be a bargaining chip. If import standards are watered down in the name of smoother trade or convenient deals, British farmers may lose out by being denied access to revolutionary tools such as gene editing, precision breeding, that the EU is slow or reluctant to adopt. Moreover, animal welfare will be weakened, consumer confidence damaged, and the long-term resilience of our food system will be put in jeopardy. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not about protectionism. This is about our values. Farmers are asking for a fair and level field on which to compete. That means import standards that reflect the standards required of British farmers and demanded by British consumers. Clear red lines in every trade negotiation, proper enforcement at our borders, and no agreements that sacrifice agriculture for political expedience. So can I ask the Minister directly, will the government guarantee that no food produced to lower standards than those required of British farmers will be allowed into our market? And will they commit to not trading away our standards in future negotiations? I would also welcome her response on public procurement of food, and we've heard a bit about that today. Currently, the government buying standards have a loophole, sadly, still in them, allowing public bodies to bypass high animal welfare standards on the grounds of cost. If we are to lead globally on animal welfare, we must uphold those principles here at home. Import standards are fundamentally about trust. Trust between farmers, consumers, and also the government. British agriculture depends on that trust. On these benches, we will examine every agreement, every regulation, and every concession that might risk undercutting our farmers and weakening our standards, or indeed compromising animal health and welfare. His Majesty's most loyal opposition urged the government to support agriculture and defend the standards that the British people hold dear.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. This debate goes to the heart of something this government cares deeply about, the future of British farming and the food on British tables. And I would like to thank my honourable friend, the member for North West Cambridgeshire, for securing it, and all the members for their contributions to this debate. Let me be direct about what we're trying to balance in this area. British farmers produce most of our food, 2/3 of it in 2024. That's 65% of everything we eat is produced in this country. When it comes to actually what can be actually grown or reared in this country, that figure rises to over 3/4. That is 77%. So in other words, we don't grow our own bananas or mangoes, and we can't grow our own citrus except in particularly hot weather, so we have to import other food. Now, the honourable gentleman, the member for Bridlington and the Wolds, used this phrase, carcass balance, which is also important to think about when one is talking about the balance between exports and imports, because in the UK we only eat particular bits of the animal. We don't eat all bits of the animal, and it's useful to be able to export those bits that the British public don't particularly want to eat. That means that the farmer that produces that particular animal gets more of a return for it than they would get if those markets weren't open. So the benefits of having open trading markets for such things might potentially be very great indeed for UK producers. And whilst we are, and I will spend much of the rest of this debate talking about standards for imports, we have to remember that exports are also important for our own homegrown industry, and exports are harder to gain if one is too closed about the imports that one is trying to allow in trade deals, because trade is a two-way thing. And so I would caution everyone who's thinking about this debate to think about that balance as well as what we would actually like to see when we come to trade deals, because it's real and it exists and we ought to take it seriously. There's something we have to remember that we're a trading nation. Trade gives families access to food that we can't grow here. It keeps prices affordable. It means we can get food out of season all year round that we may wish to have, and it provides a safety net when disease, drought or conflict disrupts supply chains. So although being able to grow most of what we want to produce here is an important part of food security, so is having reasonable, predictable, acceptable access to other markets so that we can import when we have to if there's a particular issue. So the question isn't whether we trade, it's how we trade and on whose terms. Now, this government's been clear we won't sacrifice British standards on the altar of trade deals. All imports must meet UK food safety requirements, and that is not going to change. We've been clear, and it's been mentioned by members on both sides of the debate today, of the House today. We've been clear that hormone-treated beef and chlorine-washed chicken are banned in the UK and will remain so. And as the Honourable Gentleman Member for Epping Forest pointed out, that is because such treatments designed to hide what's happened as a result of production methods. And it's something that we are firm that we won't allow. There are potentially other issues with such things in the human food chain that we don't wish to have our consumers risk. So we understand frustrations, and that there can be frustrations when farmers here are held to higher welfare standards than some competitors abroad. Sometimes there are good reasons for those differences. We haven't heard about any of that in the debate today, but farmers across the world face different geographical environments, they face different climate conditions, different disease risks, but practices like sow stalls and battery cages are banned in this country for good reason. We won't pretend that every difference in global standards is acceptable just because it happens to be legal elsewhere. And we spend our time trying to persuade other countries to see the sense of adopting our higher standards for food production when it comes to livestock. As we've said in the trade strategy, we won't lower food standards, and we will continue to uphold high standards in animal welfare. We will always consider whether imports have an unfair advantage and what the potential impact of trade agreements could be on UK food production. That's why in our trade deal with India, as my honourable friend, the member for Cambridgeshire, pointed out, we kept tariffs on pork, on chicken and eggs, because we were concerned about the welfare standards. We use the powers we have, and we will do so again where our farmers and our values are at stake. In that India deal, we also secured commitments to cooperate on animal welfare, the first time India has ever agreed to this in a trade deal. The Independent Trade and Agriculture Commission recognised this achievement in pursuing our policy on animal welfare protections as a part of our trade deals. We have a proud history of leading the way in ensuring the very best care for animals. In December, we published our animal welfare strategy, and again, members on both sides of the House have referred to it, which will improve the lives of millions of animals in the UK. We recognise that animal welfare is a global issue, and we will continue to champion high animal welfare standards around the world, promoting robust standards nationally and internationally. Our recent trade deal with Korea includes comprehensive language on animal welfare that goes beyond anything Korea have agreed to date. We will continue to strengthen cooperation and information exchange on this globally important issue. On eggs from Ukraine, and this is something my honourable friend mentioned in his opening speech, we are 90% self-sufficient in eggs in this country. The Ukrainian trade in eggs is about 1% of our supply, and that is partially done as a support for them and their industry and their economy in the situation, the global situation they find themselves in at war with Russia. But even despite that, and I've met both Ukrainian agriculture ministers, they are working hard to ensure that they can come into compliance with EU regulations in egg production as soon as possible, and we are helping them to try to do that. So the debates that we're having about animal welfare with respect to these egg imports are real, and they're happening, and I have raised them personally with both Ukrainian agriculture ministers. So protecting standards isn't enough on its own, though. We are backing British farmers to create a productive, profitable and sustainable future for farming. This support, we believe, is essential for our country's economic growth and food security. Through new technology, streamlined regulation and nature-friendly farming schemes, we're helping farmers to produce food for the nation. A stronger and more productive domestic farming sector is in our national interest, and will keep high-quality British food on the shelves for consumers. The heart of our approach is working in partnership with the sector, which is why Secretary of State and I are grateful to Baroness Batters for her recent review into farming profitability. We are taking forward a series of measures from the review to deliver practical support and long-term certainty for farmers. We recently announced a new Farming and Food Partnership Board as part of our actions, and this brings farmers, processors and retailers together, because food security isn't just about what happens on the farm, it's about the whole food chain, all the way from the farm to the fork. Farmers will have a seat at the table when policy is developed, and their voice will shape what the government does. Different parts of our food system face different challenges, and the Honourable Lady talked about what's happening in the dairy sector at the moment. But they also face different opportunities. Now, together we intend to develop sector plans which target growth in sectors like horticulture and poultry first, sectors where there's significant untapped potential to increase homegrown production. And this will be followed by other sectors, again where there's real scope to grow more of our own food, because when British farming thrives, consumers benefit with affordable, high-quality food on their tables. As well as supporting producers at home, we're working to extend the international reach of British food and drink. We will continue to focus on new markets for the sector. We have 16 agri-food attaches around the world opening doors for British producers. Last year alone, their work was worth an estimated removal of barriers which created £127 million of export value for our homegrown producers. This includes opening British pork access to Mexico and removing costly barriers for British dairy exports to Egypt. And this year, the Secretary of State and I will be leading dedicated trade missions to showcase British food and drink overseas and help boost our exports. Our high standards are something that we should be proud of. The reputation of our top quality produce helps us unlock new markets, and many of those we deal with see UK food as at the top of the quality mark, and they want to have access to it. Closer to home, the majority of our agri-food trade is with the EU, including around 70% of our agri-food imports. So that's why the SPS agreement with the EU to slash red tape for the businesses that trade most with our nearest neighbours is so important. It will make agri-food trade in our biggest market cheaper and easier to engage with. The agreement will bring down costs for UK producers and will remove most of the regulatory trade barriers. We've been clear about the importance of high animal welfare standards, and the EU has accepted that in some areas the UK will need to retain our own rules. We, like in all trade deals this government will maintain red lines in our negotiations. Now, I want to close with this. We're a nation that's always led on animal welfare. In 1999, the Labour government banned sow stalls before most of the rest of the world had heard of them. I understand the issues that the Honourable Member for Bridlington raised. And just to reassure him, I hope that we're working closely with the industry on transition in some of the areas that are mentioned in the current animal welfare strategy, such as banning farrowing crates and moving away from enriched cages for hens. We don't want the law of unintended consequences, but we do want increases in animal welfare. This government will not allow that legacy to be undermined through the backdoor by trade policy. We will protect our farmers, uphold our standards and back British food at home and abroad, which is what food security means, and that is what this government will deliver.
Sam Carling to wind up.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm glad to have a couple of minutes to wind up after what I think has been an incredibly valuable debate covering a whole range of different points. Starting, of course, with the Honourable Member from Bridlington and the Wolds, who I think agrees with me. There were various sort of bits of discussion there. I actually referred exclusively to sow stalls in my speech. He raises, very importantly, the issue of farrowing crates, which remains an issue in the UK as well. But as he was saying around wanting to make sure that our farmers aren't undermined, that's the whole point of this, right? It's about making sure that the standards we expect of those coming overseas are the same, at least, in order that they're not undercut in that way. So, yeah, we agree. My honourable friend, the member for Doncaster East in the Isle of Axholme, also, I think, made some excellent points around the enforcement of standards and honest labelling, because everyone will know here just how many emails we get from constituents around the practice of farm washing, where products that have been brought in from overseas kind of mistakenly and misleadingly, in many cases, try to imply themselves to meet British standards when they don't, with sort of big Union Jack flags and everything, as my honourable friend said. We need to get on top of that. The member for Caerfyrddin talked about how we need to make sure more of the public sector is prioritising buying British, and I think that's a really important point, and something I know the government has made commentary on. From Cannock Chase, my honourable friend made references to Baroness Batters and the issue of this in her profitability review, which I think she makes explicit reference to very positively. We had the member from Waveney Valley reinforcing some of the points I made just around the undercutting of farmers and how much I'm sure that impacts his constituents. And then, of course, we had the member for Newcastle-under-Lyme talking about, again, the importance of buying British and the critical link to the hospitality industry, including the various pubs in his constituency, the names of which he treated us to. And then moving on to the Honourable Lady, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, I think the comments on the Australian trade deal were particularly useful. And also relate to what the Shadow Minister was talking about. He spent some time talking about the Conservatives' record. There is some good stuff in there, but may I just quote to him this from Michael Gove, a former DEFRA secretary, speaking about the previous Conservative government. We negotiated poorly with Australia and New Zealand, but particularly with Australia in defence of our farmers. In the anxiety to secure trade deals, we did not think about the long term. That's his words at Conservative Party conference. So I just encourage members opposite to reflect a bit on that. I did have one comment to make if I got an intervention from Reform, but they haven't turned up, so that didn't happen. But that comment would have been, if someone had tried to attack us on this, that of course the leader of Reform went to America recently to call for economic sanctions against the UK, far from lowering tariff for British beef exporters, as we have done in our landmark economic deal with the US. So, if I may just wind up by referring to the comments the Minister made, if I can find my notes on them, there we go. I'm grateful to her for speaking about the need to ensure our farmers can export as well. It's a really important part of this. She is, of course, right. There's a balance to be struck. And I thank her for detailing some more of the government's examples of success in this area. I didn't mention Ukraine specifically with eggs, specifically because I think I'm very consciously aware of the issues she raises, but I'm very grateful to hear some of the positive measures she referred to there around perhaps getting some progress to be made over there. So I would just reiterate, really, this government has been clear that worsening our animal welfare standards and allowing import of low welfare goods is a red line for us. We're not going to do it. and that's positive, but that leaves us the question of, well, why don't we legislate to make sure of it? Because I trust this government, I can't say I trust a future government, and I don't trust the trade deals that sadly are already in place. So thank you very much.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.